in some ways unusual than perhaps we otherwise know. Two of the victims are folks that had some level of prominence here in Kansas City. Gary Taylor, a trainer who was killed at 18th and Vine yesterday, leaves behind a lot of caring friends and family. My condolences to him. I talked to some of the folks in the neighborhood this morning in the 18th and Vine area. I know everyone is shared in wanting the violence to end and in wanting to make sure that we don't see situations like we saw for Mr. Taylor. We also saw the shooting death of Aviva Okeson-Haberman of KCUR Radio. She is someone who should be with us at this press conference and frequently covered them. And we miss her. We give our condolences to her friends, her family, her colleagues as well. We recognize that as we address our pandemic, we continue with the epidemic of gun violence in Kansas City. It is something that none of us want to continue to deal with. It's something that all of us want to see substantial change on. In recent weeks, my office has announced hundreds of internships for children in urban Kansas City. My office has announced more initiatives with violence reduction, more violence interrupters at Kansas City's hospitals, but we recognize even those steps still aren't enough. We will continue to work not just with our social safety net organizations, with our police department, but with everyone in our community who is committed to seeing change in violence in Kansas City. And so we'll have more on that, and I'm happy to take any questions later in connection with that. In terms of COVID-19, Dr. Archer and I started talking to you over a year ago about some of the challenges from COVID-19 and the set of orders that we would confront. If you remember, our first set of orders related to capacity numbers at different events. It went then to a stay-at-home order. We went through a summer, oft forgotten, that did not have actually many orders at all. And then finally, in July of last year, we issued a mask requirement that only existed indoors in Kansas City. As we went through the fall months, you saw an expansion of the mask order, and here we are today. We are going back to the type of order that we saw in the midsummer of 2020. I'll talk about the order details in a second, but first let me tell you why. First, we're proud of the fact that our vaccination efforts in Kansas City continue to have strong energy, particularly as it relates to those who are over 65. 62% of Kansas Cityans over the age of 65 have completed vaccination. Once again, that's 62% of Kansas Cityans over the age of 65. 73% of Kansas Cityans over the age of 65 have initiated their vaccinations. In the total population in Kansas City, 23.6% of our population is vaccinated. 33%, or a third of our population in Kansas City, has begun their vaccination process, i.e. having at least one vaccine. We're proud that a third of our population has completed their vaccination process, and nearly 75% of our population over the age of 65 is now protected from the virus. I'll also note that this is something that we continue to encourage employers to push. There has been much discussion in America about vaccine passports and requirements and all those sorts of things. We're not in a position to try to demand or mandate anything of that sort, but we certainly think that it's fair for employers to encourage it. In my office, the mayor's office, a diverse group of folks ranging from their 20s to their 60s, and demographics diversity as well, all have completed their vaccination processes. I encourage families and businesses to celebrate these milestones as well, to encourage others in our community to be proactive in getting their vaccines. Here at city government more broadly in Kansas City, we have a situation where folks have to continue to get COVID-19 tested regularly. However, if you've completed your vaccines, you of course do not. Employers are going to be important. Families are going to be important in encouraging people to get the vaccine. And I continue to recommend that everyone take the vaccine that becomes available to them, whatever type of vaccine exists. That includes the Johnson & Johnson vaccine itself. And while we're continuing to see COVID case numbers that are certainly down from what we saw previously, we encourage folks to continue to do things like get their COVID-19 testing. We recognize that there continues to be vaccine hesitancy. We also recognize that there are virus mutations that continue to be a concern. I will say it very clearly, although we are coming up with changes which in essence do loosen up things. We do not want to see the situation that they've seen in Michigan and Ontario and other parts of the upper Midwest and southern Canada, where we have stay-at-home orders again, where we have very significant challenges. And the health department, importantly, is filling a vital gap in that vaccination process, making sure that we're adjusting clinics for evening and weekend hours. You can go to the Kansas City Health Department on Tuesdays and Thursdays between 5 and 7:15 p.m. for evening slots and opportunities for vaccinations. Same-day registrations, walk-up opportunities are available. At Smith Hale Middle School, that's in southeast Kansas City, we have Saturday vaccination opportunities from 9 a.m. to 2 p.m. All of those are important to making sure that we have a lot of folks getting vaccinated. And to continuing on the vaccine point, I've kind of always seen it as a third, and a third. I think a third of our population was very excited, interested, eager to get the vaccine. You've seen a lot of folks there. There may be, I think unfortunately, a third that have that greater level of hesitancy. But to me, there still is that middle third, those for whom we need to lower the barriers to entry for the vaccination process. That's why we're doing things like at middle schools in southeast Kansas City. That's why other operations around our region, Operation SAFE in Clay County, in Kansas City North, which is available to every Missourian, right, are important in this process, and that's why the health department's work has been so important. Now, as we talk about the future of COVID-19 in Kansas City's response, we have two updates to the documents that we have for you. First of all, we're extending our emergency proclamation to run until August 31st of 2020. That will make it coextensive with the governor's emergency proclamation. Governor Parson, a few weeks ago, extended that proclamation until August 31. Does that mean that we will have potential shutdowns and orders and requirements and all that until that time? The answer is no. Of course, as you would note, Missouri doesn't actually have a statewide mask mandate or anything of the sort. This is primarily to continue to work with emergency management operations, both with the federal government and Missouri's government, and we will keep the emergency proclamation so long as the governor's order continues. On the order itself, our 14th amended order will go into effect this Friday morning at 12:01 a.m., and it will run in alignment with the Clay County Health Order until May 28th, for us until 12:01 a.m. that day. Guidelines that remain unchanged are the following. Masks continue to be required indoors in places of public accommodations for those who are 5 and over. There are exceptions. So again, masks remain as a requirement indoors in Kansas City until May 28th. The following exceptions exist. Among them is if all individuals in the room are vaccinated. If there is knowledge that all individuals in the room are vaccinated, then the mask requirement isn't applicable. This would mean that in places like office buildings, your staffs, etc., if everyone has been vaccinated and if there is knowledge that everyone's been vaccinated, then there is no requirement that masks be worn. We're also rescinding a number of other important rules that have been the source of discussion for some time. All capacity and social distancing requirements on business operations and gatherings under previous COVID-19 orders are rescinded. What that means is that the requirement that folks be seated within restaurants is rescinded. Other requirements relating to certain capacity limits, the number of folks that are inside certain establishments, are rescinded as well. However, for the mask requirement, if you remain within 6 feet of someone else indoors and you are not vaccinated, and there's not knowledge that they are vaccinated, then a mask requirement remains. And so you can be indoors without masks if there is a space of 6 feet, or you can be indoors without masks if there is knowledge that everyone inside is vaccinated. There is, again, no mask requirement outdoors in Kansas City any longer. This is largely like the order that existed and was issued, I believe, in early July, and so that's the position that we'll have. A few other things that I want to note. I thank our health department. I thank all of our healthcare partners. I thank so many who have been important and vital in connection with this effort. Last week, I visited St. Luke's Health Services daycare, where a lot of our essential workers, and remember back when we were talking about essential workers, existed. They made sure that there were continuing to be child watching opportunities for healthcare workers as they continued to address the pandemic and important and key issues for us. That continues to be important for us along the way. While there are some who wanted to see a full rescission of the mask requirement, we believe that because it's only been a few weeks in Kansas City and in Missouri that folks could actually get vaccines, we wanted to make sure that those who were interested still have that opportunity to do so. I talked to a number of school leaders who said that they wanted to make sure they could get through the end of the school year, having a mask requirement in place to make sure that teachers, educators, and others who may not have been vaccinated can stay safe, and certainly families stay safe as well. I've said a few different times, I actually hope this is our last order. Emergency orders aren't the sorts of things that are supposed to be around forever, and they're not supposed to be around even for a long time. We've taken every step we did because we wanted to keep our community safe. And so I hope that after May 28th, we have a chance to live in a Kansas City without orders, where more people are vaccinated, where things are as close to back to normal as possible, although I do think, as the doctor has said a few different times, that masks will probably be a part of life long after. They just may not be a compulsory part of life in connection with Kansas City's orders. I note a few other things before I wrap, and then we'll take questions. I received an email the other day from a Heather Kraus. Heather's from Sioux Falls, South Dakota, who came to Kansas City this past weekend with her husband for a vacation. She emailed us and she said, "I was inspired by the effort your city has made to create a safe space for your community. From safe dining options to active social distancing, we felt incredibly safe exploring the city." That's from a woman in a state that does not have a COVID mask order at all. I remain proud of our community, the way we've worked together this past year, are continuing to lead by example, and the ways in which we've protected each other. Now that all Missourians who are 16 and over are eligible for the vaccine, we'll continue to encourage folks to get the vaccine so we can get back to normal. I've had gym owners, I've had lots of people who've reached out to me over the year, it feels like, and who've said, we don't want to have mask requirements in our classes. We don't want to have any number of issues. Well, there are a few options. One is make sure that everybody in the bar theory or yoga class or what have you is vaccinated. If you do that, then you don't have to live within the mask requirement indoors. The other thing we encourage is so many of our business establishments to make sure that everyone is getting the vaccine where you have knowledge of folks getting the vaccine. There may be a question, what about grocery stores, larger establishments? Obviously, it would be impossible in a large place to know that everybody coming in has been vaccinated, so you should continue to see masks be worn at places like grocery stores, your home improvement stores, those larger congregations of persons that remain indoors. Folks may also ask about certain outdoor venues, ranging from Major League Baseball to anything under the sun. You'll have to continue to check with a number of those venues. For example, our friends at the Kansas City Royals continue to be subject to requirements as it relates to Major League Baseball and what reopening looks like, so you'll continue to see masks being worn at places like the ballpark, among other things. We think it's important for Kansas City and Kansas Cityans to get back to normal, and we think that this is another step in that process. We look forward and we continue to work with our other jurisdictions, health professionals, and others to make sure that we're all taking the right steps to make sure that we're safe. If you want my thoughts, I think it is important to have at least some level of a mask requirement around ongoing. I know that metropolitan counties, other metropolitan counties, are considering abolishing a mask requirement altogether. Here in Kansas City, we do not believe that it's safe to do so, particularly in close, tight, indoor environments. And so we will continue to push that forward. We think that this is a fair compromise for Kansas City businesses, Kansas City restaurants, Kansas City wedding venues, and so many others. There aren't capacity requirements. Most other rules are gone. However, it's important to make sure that if people are close, masks are worn, unless they're actively engaged in eating, drinking, any number of activities. Let me speak briefly on crime, and then I'll break for questions, and Dr. Archer here is, as always, I should say, as our expert in connection with that which we're doing. As I noted earlier, in connection with crime, we announced just a few weeks ago our Youth Summer Initiative. This is based on a program that came from Omaha, Nebraska. Since we've announced this program, more than 900 young people have applied for internships in just 3 weeks. 80% are young Kansas Cityans of color. We encourage folks to continue to get involved with this effort, and we've seen that in other cities that have this program, there was a 74% decrease in violent crime for program participants, a 27% increase in high school graduation rates, and citywide, of all ages, a 9% increase in black employment. We will continue to look at holistic approaches to how we address our violent crime problems, but we recognize, importantly, that it is a problem. And so while we may have fewer press conferences in the future about COVID-19, we will continue to work on the issues that we've had for a number of years. We recognize that we'll tackle this head on as we've tackled COVID-19 head on. In many ways, these two crises have defined my time as mayor, and I know my work with Dr. Archer during the last year and a half as well. With that, we welcome any questions you might have. Again, Dr. Archer is here to answer our more technical questions, and we will go from there. I think as we've done a few different times, we'll go down the line. If you have questions for me, I'll go first, and then if there are questions for Dr. Archer, we'll do that all at once as well. We'll go with you, and shout loud and proud if you could.
Mayor Lucas, can you discuss what steps are being taken right now specifically to solve the gun violence like what we saw over the weekend in the short term?
So in connection with our gun violence challenges and what steps are being taken, we have a few. I will say this very honestly, they're just clearly not enough, right? People ask me all the time, what are we doing? Is it sufficient? It's not. Things that are being done, right? We've talked about youth initiatives. We've talked about working on youth employment. We continue to invest in conflict resolution. I will have a proposal before City Council that looks to spend American Relief Plan funds, i.e. the stimulus money we're getting from the federal government, on violence reduction strategies. We have a new violence reduction program. There was a meeting about 2 weeks ago with myself, other community leaders, Jackson County Prosecutor, the Chief of Police, and others to make sure at least that we're listening to community ideas, voices, and impacts on it. But I walked around 19th and Vine this morning. You see bullet holes still there. You see the ongoing issues. I continue to believe that economic development in more communities of our city is going to be important. I continue to believe that making sure that folks see that there are alternatives to violent crime, so starting at a younger age, will be important. But then I also believe that there continue to be too many firearms on the streets of Kansas City. The state legislature has shown a disinterest in ever seeing a change in some of those issues. And again, I'm not interested in taking away lawful gun owners' firearms, but a piece of legislation that we pushed in Jefferson City that has gone nowhere is, for example, taking away the firearms of those who've been convicted of domestic violence offenses. If you are beating your spouse, if you're beating your children, and if you've been convicted of such things, why do we still have those firearms out in the stream of commerce? And those are often firearms that are either stolen, right, or are then used in other offenses later on. This starts to create the huge numbers that we have and that we face each and every day in Kansas City. So again, I'm not one who doesn't say that there aren't a lot of people issues that we need to address, because there are, and we continue to address them. But you know what? You could probably have all the money in the country thrown at different programs. If we don't actually address people at an early enough age so that they know that there are opportunities beyond, right, solving issues with guns, and if we have all the guns in the world that continue to flood our city, including ghost guns, guns that are illegally purchased and procured at pawn shops, other conventions, then we're going to continue to have issues with violent crime in this city and other major American cities. And so I hope that at least folks listen to us in connection with making those changes long term.
Yeah, I have two questions about COVID. First, I heard you mention the passports, and would you encourage companies and businesses to maybe check like a passport, their COVID vaccination card when they come in, kind of almost like what they do with seeing IDs going into cars?
So, on the first point, as it relates to the so-called passports, right, and Kansas City is not creating a COVID-19 passport. I'll tell my friends in Jefferson City, don't worry, you don't have to preempt us. We are not doing such a thing. However, I do think that it's something, and maybe this exists in your work places as well, where you can know about the vaccination status of a number of folks if they elect to volunteer. And I do think, at least for me, I know, as you've all reported, right, I have a young child, right, even having visitors who come by, right, knowing that they are vaccinated, knowing that you will have that level of safety, I think is something that is a perfectly reasonable, and I think in some ways essential way to make sure that we're safe with how we're interacting with one another. And so that's why we suggested a knowledge requirement here, which is that if you know that everybody's vaccinated, and can people lie? Yes, right? But that can happen in almost any specter of things. But if you know that everybody there is vaccinated, then I think it's important that we can say, all right, then you see why masks aren't necessary. I have heard some pushback sometimes that people say, well, if you just keep all the requirements around forever, why would I ever get vaccinated? Which, you know, there are lots of reasons to still get vaccinated, but if you're one who likes that C-rate logic, then there you go. My view is, though, that this actually gives somebody that extra bit of, frankly, encouragement to say that, yeah, the way you get back to normal is if we can make sure that everybody gets the vaccine. It is available in ample areas. We are creating more opportunities at the health department each day in different ways, in evenings, in weekends to get vaccinated. So I think that's the way to do it. And so I would say instead of a compulsory process for vaccinations, the vaccine passport discussion, the European travel discussion, I think probably the most effective way we can say is if you want your rooms, your gatherings to get back to normal, then that's how we do it, and then masks will not be required. Remind me of question 2, or if...
Yes, the second question I have is it too early to talk about what happens next with Arrowhead Stadium? This is great news for businesses and restaurants, but now that next step is football season. What is your look on that?
Oh, interesting. Say the last part.
Football season, thinking ahead to Arrowhead.
Oh, gosh. You know, I look at Dr. Archer because... yes, we continue to talk to all of our partners, all of our entertainment partners, ranging from the Kansas City Convention Center at Bartle Hall, large hoteliers, wedding venues and planners, and certainly our professional sports teams. We will continue to have discussions on how they can be safe. I have appreciated the fact that the leagues have also been an important part of that discussion, not just going for a kind of renegade and I may say reckless approach to how we can do these things, but instead actually making sure they're working hand in hand with our health department. I'm incredibly proud of the cooperation that Dr. Archer has been able to receive from both the Kansas City Royals and the Kansas City Chiefs, and will continue to persist with that sort of cooperation, even in a time, let's say, after orders are long gone. I think everybody has remained interested in keeping folks safe. And I'm also very proud, and I'm proud of Dr. Archer, I'm proud of the Chiefs, and the fact that we were the template for how the NFL could responsibly reopen. I think that we are the template in many ways of how Major League Baseball can get it done right. And, states that had far more restrictions. I still remember the Buffalo Bills had a home playoff game, which is very rare for them. But they had one this year, and Governor Cuomo and others largely followed, in some ways, the layout that you saw from the Kansas City, Missouri Health Department and the Kansas City Chiefs. I mean, those are the sorts of things that are promising, so we'll continue to work towards that. But we have absolutely no answer right now in terms of what next football season looks like. I've heard from the NFL they have an interest in having full stadiums and all that sort of stuff. We'll see. I get in trouble if I speculate on football before I get there, and so that's where we are for now.
I've got 2 questions for you and 2 questions for Dr. Archer. First, Mr. Mayor, what you said before about the violence is right on. Like, get kids when they're earlier and bring them up in not a culture of violence and things like that. I get it. But what can be done when you walk out of this room today after this news conference to keep people safe in Kansas City? Because there is a lot of stress in the city. These shootings, these innocent people getting shot and killed, these happening in Westport, in big areas where there's lots of public. What can be done right now immediately to keep the people in Kansas City safe?
But, I think every entertainment venue should look at how many shootings are generated from what has occurred there. We had a bar in East Kansas City that's now closed, where there were a number of shootings, mass shootings, I think starting after the previous season's AFC Championship game and long after. Eventually, our Regulated Industries Department looked at and saw issues where they weren't in compliance with all of the security needs that I think were important and all of the rules of Kansas City government. We will do that very same thing with every bar where you have these repeated incidents. Now, this happened a few steps down from an establishment, but as I understand it, it stemmed from a fight that had occurred inside an establishment, kind of spills out onto the streets thereafter, and then you have security guards that are in harm's way. So that is a very today thing. That is a thing that's already happening. Our Regulated Industries Department division, usually looks into these sorts of incidents right after and sees if there is some sort of consistent problem with an area with rules not being followed, among other things. That at least speaks to the entertainment district approach and how we can do things. At 18th and Vine, I think it's fair to say the city has actually tried fairly hard. There were new traffic patterns instituted during the warm weather months to try to make sure crowds could either get out easier, among other things. We have continued at City Council to try to suggest that they do more work, they being the 18th and Vine businesses, work more closely in terms of private security, public security, i.e. the police department and others. How do you actually make sure that they're talking more, that there may be not necessarily a higher quantity presence, but making it more apparent that it's a safer environment, lighting, among other things, being part of that. I think those are the sorts of things that are the right now type of idea and what can be done. I will continue to say, though, another what can be done is, we need to make sure that we have folks that are comfortable in talking to law enforcement after these incidents. There continues to be a police community trust issue. I'm familiar with the fact that, and this came from someone in my office, that there was a woman there who saw what happened. The question was, did you call the police? She said, no, I don't call the police. We need to find a way, whether it's the police, whether it's a separate number, whether it's something different, where folks can see how we can solve these challenges, how we can help prevent some of them, because sometimes people kind of know what's going on. To get a little ahead of myself, but I'm not in the investigative process. There were some fights earlier that evening in Swope Park, and it seems as if some of the folks may have relocated in the areas where they were fighting, right? People tend to kind of know what's happening. And that's too many of these shootings, particularly in these big public areas. We have got to find a way to yield that information better, and I think that's a step that we need to take both with law enforcement, actually the health department works in that area, and with others on our violence reduction plan. It is not as simple as there were no witnesses, let's just kind of move on, right? We have lots of cameras at 18th and Vine. We can do better lighting. A lot of people know what's going on. I think it's that sort of step that is important on the violence point.
Moving on to COVID-19, I understand that the Core Four, the places that have been referred to as the Core Four, have been in discussions about the next move for COVID because everybody wants to be on the same page so that we have some continuity within the metro. What have those discussions been like, and has there been pushback from one or more of the Core Four in making an overall plan for the entire metro?
Well, I think that we have, throughout the process, and there's been some media discussion otherwise, throughout this process, we have always continued to talk, primarily with our health professionals, our medical directors, and others. There are different political challenges in each. Here in Kansas City, under the mayor's emergency powers, the mayor can issue orders. In Johnson County, you have to have a vote of the commission. Which led to what was disappointing to me, right, a different closing time earlier, I guess, last year, when the rest of the metro went to a 10 o'clock closing time. Johnson County remained at midnight. I think that was frustrating for Kansas City, Missouri, Kansas City, Kansas, other business owners around the region. And so most of the work that we're typically trying to do is to say, this is where we are looking and where we are thinking, understanding that everyone has their own political bodies that they'll have to speak to long term. And so in terms of what the discussions were, I think Dr. Archer has been very clear in sharing with many the importance of masks on an ongoing basis. I think continuing challenges as it relates to threats with COVID-19, the fact that we don't want to see the types of spikes you've seen in other jurisdictions, how it's been important for us to continue to have mask requirements for folks of varying ages, including our teenagers and others. There has been some debate as to whether you want to release it for schools here a few weeks before the end of the school year, and we've elected not to in Kansas City. So for me, it is more of uniformity in discussion as opposed perhaps to results. but it is making sure that we stay informed throughout the process. And I think all of us have been heartened on how we can share data, how we can continue to communicate through the Mid-America Regional Council, and how importantly we can look to see how at least we're working on our vaccination efforts. You know, the next big step for us is in reaching particularly demographics that have been tough to reach. That includes some of minority populations, Latinos, for example, and others. How do we work together, recognizing, for example, that there's no population that is just in Kansas City, Missouri, right? How do we work with Wyandotte County, Kansas City, Kansas, that has a high Latino population, in making sure that we're reaching out to folks? I think that's really what looks to be the next phase of what our cooperation will be, beyond just what is in order. I'm going to give the jig up, right? We're coming to a point where there will be no orders at a certain point. In some jurisdictions like Cass County, right, that's now. And other jurisdictions like Kansas City, that may be May 29th, right? But what's important for us is to see, all right, recognizing that, how do we work together to make sure people are getting vaccines, how we're tracking future outbreaks, and how we can stop the spread of COVID-19, particularly as you're seeing those strains kind of explode in some other areas. I know you have questions for Dr. Archer. We'll go around and you can come back for those.
In '94, Representative Cleaver then in City Hall, he instituted a buyback to kind of get some of these guns off the street and stop the proliferation. Is that something that you're looking into now to do to get these guns off the street?
Okay, so Morgan.
Gun buyback, how do you feel?
Say that again?
Gun buybacks?
Gun buybacks. Well, you know, it's an interesting conversation. Gun buybacks are a thing we cannot do. The Missouri. So if you have, and I'd encourage your viewers, come up with every interesting and creative gun strategy that you can come up with, and it has likely been preempted in Missouri. And so I have lots of people who talk to me about very important, impactful, and I think creative ideas. Unfortunately, we can't do much with almost any of them. So gun buybacks for some years now have been preempted by the state legislature, eliminating the city's ability to actually do it. That said, what does that mean? That means that, of course, others can do it. Some years ago, I believe in the mid-1990s, there was a gun buyback that was largely organized by others in our nonprofit community, Southern Christian Leadership Conferences, another of black ministers, and others. And it had elements of success. Now, the challenge was, I think they did it out at Arrowhead Stadium. A lot of people brought broken guns and got $200 out of it. I'd take it. I actually think that that is effective. Give us your broken guns or what have you, all those sorts of things. But we need to find a way, and this is where we'll continue to reach out with nonprofit partners, finding ways to get some of these firearms off the streets. I mean, I think one of the more challenging things that has been interesting to me in my years as mayor and even the city council, I used to get to do police ride-alongs sometimes. The level of firearm that is out on the streets right now. I mean, people are cruising our community with AR-15s. Right, and going out for a fun night in an entertainment district. I mean, you're seeing those sorts of things. You all see these videos that are posted on Facebook and TikTok and Instagram where you have real gun battles. That was an element of what happened at 19th and Vine last night, right? These are the sorts of ways that people get hit by stray bullets, right? These aren't just 38s shooting back and forth at each other. We have real assault weapons that are, you know, in these kind of dense urban streets where you're seeing these very types of challenges. And so I think there are absolutely reasonable solutions we have. I think in many ways our state and federal government are unwilling to explore them. So we'll continue to do all we can from the local side to make sure that we go to the fullest extent of the law allowed to us to make sure that we're being creative in banning possession for domestic offenders, for youth, and then certainly just trying to reach people, understanding that it's also a people problem and that we need to try to make sure we're addressing the people problem in connection with it. Yes.
One question and then I'm done. For businesses that have followed all the rules, that have done really well, now they're getting a little bit relaxed restrictions. Talk to those business owners and maybe that you're proud of them, kind of how you started off this.
Well, look, I'm proud of Kansas City's businesses. We all, but they in particular, weathered a very challenging year. And I've talked to a lot of them actually, and many have discussed and noted the fact that now they're having trouble finding employees in some ways. There becomes a new and a different challenge. And so we recognize the challenges for them. That's why we've continued to be fairly relaxed on a number of rules, including liquor to go from a lot of your bar establishments, including outdoor dining, which will run at the very least as long as the emergency order goes. So now through the entire summer, we will have outdoor dining. You'll see streets closed down, parking lots and others, so folks can go out and eat and drink and enjoy more space. That's both a positive from public health, but also for our economy. And so I think that those will be fairly important. In terms of businesses that have had more challenge, the aforementioned gyms. And I had a lot of gym owners reach out to me. Well, there are two answers now. One, right, social distancing, which I think many have done, cleaning your facilities, of course, but then also to the extent that you'll have tighter classes, right? If you want everybody there, encouraging your patrons to get vaccinated is a key way that we address the problems at issue. But look, it is not lost on me that we've had a number of challenges to our businesses, particularly small businesses in Kansas City over the past year, and hopefully this is a moment of relief for them. We still have to be safe, but it's relief. There will be another class of businesses, though, that may say, well, we want to make sure that we still have mask requirements, even if somebody's all by themselves in the store. It is important to recognize that law, fundamentally, and these orders are just a floor. You can be far above it. So you can continue to require any number of things, masking, social distancing, and enhanced hand washing, all those sorts of things. And indeed, I would encourage a number of industry sectors to make sure they do that. For example, right, your nursing home facilities and others, which likely, if they're wise and prudent, will follow all types of additional protective procedures as well. This is really just a floor as applies to all Kansas City businesses, but we continue to encourage our business owners to come up with as much protection as they think is necessary to protect their customers, their patrons, their students, their parishioners, and so many others.
Mayor, there's some consideration down in Jefferson City to have the legislature sign off on the city's plans for spending its American Rescue money. I presume you oppose that.
So I have incredible disagreement with the legislature signing off on our plans with the American Rescue Plan. Here's the deal, right? The reason the American Rescue Plan was written the way it was because the last time kind of shafted a lot of American cities, including this one. Kansas City spent months, indeed is still spending time trying to get money from some of our county partners. And so why we would go through another long bureaucratic process that is only going to increase inefficiencies, that is only going to delay our ability to help Kansas City businesses is beyond me. I will give one example that's very clear. You saw last year around that in Clay County, from the Clay County portion of Kansas City, we actually received CARES Act funds well before we received them in Jackson County, even though there are 2 times as many Kansas Cityans who live in Jackson County as compared to Clay. What were we able to do? We were able to spend $3 million on small business relief in the Clay County portion of Kansas City, as compared to $500,000 in Jackson County's portion of Kansas City. Again, 330,000 Kansas Cityans live in Jackson County, 135 live in Clay. However, we were able to spend 6 times as much on small business relief in Clay County because we actually have the money to do so. Why you would create these sorts of processes where certain areas of the city will be treated differently, where you're going through a different state process, where I think they disproportionately have valued the voices of counties over cities like this one, the largest in the state of Missouri, is incredibly frustrating. For example, we still don't have CARES Act funds, I believe, from the Platte County portion of Kansas City, Missouri. And we're about a year into the CARES Act discussion. Why you would create that again with the American Relief Plan is beyond me, and I think this sort of check on us, I mean, look, at a certain point, either you believe in representative government or you don't. Is Kansas City just a colony of a bunch of voiceless people who have no idea what they can do, or are you actually going to trust the people of Kansas City to do something? We already have, and half my questions have been about policing today, we already have a situation where, to Shannon's question, or to others, where they would say, well, what are you going to do today about this? Well, I guess I'm going to call the Kansas City Police Department and see what they're going to do. Right? I think that's already backwards in terms of how we address things. So I think the next important part for us would not be to expand that in every other way. We have important things we're trying to do with vaccinations, important things to do with supporting Kansas City businesses, important things to do with making sure that we can pay and take care of our city employees, keep our parks open, turn on our fountains, cut the grass, fill potholes. why you would approve that in Jefferson City and give every other city in the state of Missouri some sort of check on it when they have more than enough checks over what people in Kansas City are doing now. It's beyond me. It would be inane. It's an unhelpful sort of thing. I go to Jefferson City all the time, certainly respect everybody. I respect their lane. I hope they'll respect ours.
But Mayor, that's exactly the sort of response that they anticipate when you bring up things like fountains or cutting the grass. They want to make sure, those legislators who feel that way, that the rescue money is spent on things directly towards rescue and not a fountain and not cutting the grass.
Right.
They're going to do that anyway.
You know, I mean, here's the thing. What I hear all the time, and I respect it, I have not been elected to represent the people of the state of Missouri. I'm not a state rep. I'm not the governor. I'm not any number of these steps. I think in that same way, they, respectfully, have not been elected to represent the people of the United States of America. Congress and the President of the United States crafted a program with the desire to get money to the cities of the United States. I don't love the fact that the city of St. Louis, Missouri has $500 million while Kansas City has $200 million. But there's a formula for why that happened. And that's because they're trying to address issues like long-term systemic poverty in the city of St. Louis. I do not think it's my role as a guy sitting in Kansas City to tell St. Louis, no, you can't do this or that. I'm not the mayor of St. Louis. I don't live in St. Louis, right? I don't have any control over them. So why do I need that power? I would say that same way for people who are trying to look to control what happens in Kansas City. We can be responsible enough. There are federal guidelines. I think in some ways it's inherent racism to continue to suggest time and time again that cities, particularly your larger blue cities, the ones with most of the black folks, most of the Latinos, most of the minorities, and a number of others, are the ones that actually don't know how to handle their own money. It's insulting time and again, and I think in some ways it's fundamentally undermining our ability to try to address the challenges that we have in our cities. Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, I'm going to divert the conversation back to crime. We were talking to some business owners down over by the 18th and Vine District this morning. Some of them saying they're not getting enough help from the city. They say they're being treated unequally compared to other entertainment districts like Westport and Kansas City. What's your response to hearing that?
Well, a few different things. First of all, with any of our orders, we try to balance, I think, the very important issues that are before us. One is the importance of public health, which has been paramount for us throughout this crisis, but also how we can safely reopen our community. And so what I would say to anyone who is angry from any direction, and lots of what I do gets folks angry on many sides, is to say that we believe that we can get into a safer environment. You can be outside, keeping your distance, right, where perhaps you don't have to follow the same rules as before. We have continued the mask requirement in certain areas because, you know, we've actually talked to the people who help run things like schools. We've talked to waiters and waitresses that want to feel safe. We've talked to folks that are interacting with a lot of people who said we still are safer inside with that, and they're absolutely right. And so we will continue to encourage safety in all the ways possible. I think Kansas City's order today that we're discussing that will come into effect on Friday provides a strong and a good balance of how do you go back to life as normal, but also making sure that you're keeping people safe. It encourages people to get vaccinations. It's encouraging people to wear masks when they're close. And importantly, it's encouraging people, though, to be able to go back out again. We're not saying you need to stay home all the time for most. But what we are saying is that fundamentally, you need to make sure that we're still being cognizant of others while we're dealing with all of our COVID-19 spread.
So my question was related to what happened down near 18th and Vine for shooting last
Yep.
night. Business owners down there say they're not getting enough help from the city to keep that area safe in comparison to other areas of the city. What is your response to that?
Say that again for me.
18th and Vine business owners looking for more support from the city to keep the area safe.
Are they looking for more reports?
Support from the city.
Oh,
They're saying you're not getting enough.
yeah. In terms of financial support, or?
Prevent violent crime.
Okay. I think here's how we typically will see it. We try to provide all the support we possibly can. There are limits to what we can do as well, relevant to the American Relief Plan discussion before. The city will continue to enforce its orders. The city will continue to make sure folks can stay safe, and in terms from the business side, we'll continue to try to provide every, not only bit of funding that we can, but also access to other areas of funding. Federal funding sources, the Small Business Administration. We've had discussions on PPP. Kansas City government got very active through our KC BizCare office and making sure we could address any number of those items. So whether the support is actually from your health side, right, or your support is more from a business sort of side, I think that the city each day is working hard through all of its different agencies, Kansas City's Health Department, Kansas City Small Business Group, to make sure that we're addressing any number of the problems. I know that there is sometimes another discussion from our restaurant and bar establishments that says, well, we like these rules because it keeps us from having to be able to be ones that are enforcers ourselves. We recognize that. We recognize in some ways that level of challenge, and I think this is also a place where you see that balance. There is still a mask rule in Kansas City. There are still ways that you're able to follow, I think, a number of the rules and regulations, and you can still call the health department if you're seeing ongoing challenges relating to it. And so I think that we are actually working hard to do it. We continue to announce more plans for how we can expand support from every type of basis, both the economic and financial side and the health side, and I think that's where we'll continue to exist and operate as well.
I'm fully vaccinated. I'm going to take this down so you can hear me a little
Yes,
bit better
ma'am.
and maybe read my lips as well. So business owners in the 18th and
Oh, you're on violence now.
Yes.
Sorry. Sorry. She just let me go for a long time.
I know.
Right. But that's all right. Go ahead. So it's support for business owners and security
Business
support.
owners in the 18th and Vine district this morning, we talked to them. They
Mm-hmm.
say we're not getting enough help safety-wise in comparison to other districts
Mm-hmm.
in Kansas City, like Westport, like Power and Light. I know the challenges down there are different. Like you said earlier, trust for policing, police on the streets down there probably isn't the best solution. But how do you address safety in that area when people are saying they're not getting enough help from the city?
Well, I mean, a few different things have happened. We continue to have an 18th and Vine policy committee that works on a number of the security setup, works with businesses, works to see what will happen. I will say kind of straight up at a certain point, we need the businesses to come together too. I think you see a difference of opinion in terms of what people want to see. I've heard from people that said, well, we don't want to see 50 more police officers on the streets every day either. And so where is the balance going to be? I think that in many ways that's a largely business-led conversation. If they want that further security, part of how it works in Westport, they spend hundreds of thousands of dollars a year on that security force that they have. The Country Club Plaza is much the same way. That is not largely city funded in terms of who is there. They may be Kansas City police officers, but many of them are working off duty and are being funded through those types of groups themselves. We are happy to support that. And have supported that. I think adding another $50,000 for security efforts at 18th and Vine. But there are going to be a few things that we have to think about. One, right, we want to be invited to help, right? You don't want to send help that nobody wants. And then two, we got to make sure people are operating and acting responsibly within the establishments themselves, right? Encouraging any number of the issues, discouraging the types of issues that we see sometimes at certain places. And so if you're an establishment where a fight started and it led to a violent incident thereafter, right, I would look to them to see, all right, well, what could we do differently next time? How do we make sure that we don't have those disturbances that rise to that level? How do we make sure we have enough internal security to ensure that the fight doesn't escalate to that level of a point? Right, there are a number of things. I was at 18th, I live at 18th and Vine. So last year, I remember talking to one of the businesses there that said, yeah, we're not in any of this stuff. We're not engaged in it. We need more responsibility. At the same time, they said, oh, yeah, but we rent out our parking lot for people who throw parties on the weekends. I mean, you know, that's how you kind of get to this point. And so everybody has to work together, but it's not that the city will just have a magic solution unto itself. We want to make sure we're listening to the businesses there, but we're listening to folks as they come together. I've convened meetings where the businesses were all together, and about 2 hours later, we didn't get where we needed to be. I think we will continue to convene those types of meetings, but I think more than anything it is, how about we say what we want? I encourage actually some of the neighbors, like who actually live in the neighborhood today, to be more active in their own neighborhood association in terms of, hey, we want this as the neighbors, right? It gets tiring, frustrating, sad, discouraging, disappointing to have shootings again and again down the block from you. I think we need to hear from more of them, not just the business owners. I think we need to hear from more folks at our district meetings. We have a 3rd district meeting every month about ways that we can make it safer, because I think probably the greatest challenge in the 30 years we've been talking about 18th and Vine, and the 30 years y'all have been covering it, is that everybody, and it's fine to all have a different view, but I always found as a councilman it was real easy if I was working with an area and all the business owners came together and said, this is what we want, right? Something I voted against were metal detectors in Westport. Hate the idea from a civil liberties approach. I lost, right? They've had metal detectors for years. They contend that it's made the area safer because the business owners were in concert. They were able to get that passed through city council. I encourage 18th and Vine, no matter what the solution is, to speak in that level of concert. And we're happy to convene it for them. But that's the type of unity that I think we need to try to address at least that part of we want more from the city. Instead of having 8 different voices that are calling, the major over the Central Patrol Division at KCPD saying, well, I want you here, I don't want you here, which is heard sometimes, right? We want you to stay 2 blocks down the street. We want you in this spot. I mean, that's the sort of, I think, discussion that we need to get through. Okay. We'll make a break for Dr. Archer.
Hi, Dr. Archer. Kind of 2 questions. With vaccinations widely available and restrictions loosening, are you concerned that this might send mixed messages to those who haven't been vaccinated? And how do you prevent complacency? I know you and I talked hesitancy last week, so kind of reiterate what that is.
So it's interesting in piggybacking on some of what the mayor has said, but when I think of a different pandemic, a different disease, influenza, the best pediatricians have told the mothers that until your child is old enough to get their flu shot, you actually should restrict others being around that child that haven't had the flu shot. So we know what we should be doing, whether we mandate it or whether we do it because it's the right thing to do and we're educated and understand that. As we move forward, more and more people are getting vaccinated. And one of the things I'm asking folks to do is don't just get vaccinated, talk it up to others. Even if you have a little bit of an adverse reaction, I was tired the day or 2 after my 2nd shot, and I'm honest about that. But boy, that's a whole lot different than having a tube down your throat in the intensive care unit. And so, we just need to talk it up, get people to do it. Businesses are moving forward. Some businesses are now paying their employees a little bit to get vaccinated. Others are saying, well, you can't go on business-related travel. I would not recommend people flying on a plane that haven't been vaccinated. So those are things that we can control and can do.
Another question is about Arrowhead. What do you do next when it comes to getting to full capacity? I know there's many southern schools that say they will have their full capacity when it comes to football season, but what about Arrowhead?
So we're having regular meetings. I had a meeting this morning with the Royals, and we stay in touch regularly. It really depends on what happens with variants with this disease. Do we get something that starts to percolate that is resistant to the current vaccines? At what point are we getting vaccines available for children and kids? There's a lot of variables, and trying to predict exactly where we're going to be in August is going to be a challenge. But we're having conversations. We all are on speed dial. I get a call in the evening or over the weekend as we're thinking about stuff. So we'll find a prudent approach, and we'll be moving forward in a way. And I believe it will be more open than it certainly was this last season.
Dr. Archer, as we've seen throughout this pandemic, not just in Kansas City, but in Johnson County and some of the other, Wyandotte County, some of the other places, there's a little bit of a discrepancy between what the health department wants to do and what the city wants to do economically to give a balance. Having said that, are you 100% on board with the changes that are being made in Kansas City today?
I am 100% on board. We've worked very closely together. As the mayor said, these are minimum guidelines. Most people will do a little bit more or quite a bit more to protect themselves and others. But, this is a good floor. At the point that we have had everybody have a chance to get vaccinated that wants to get vaccinated, then I don't feel like mandating certain levels of restrictions for those that won't get vaccinated. That's kind of their personal responsibility now. So yes, we're in support of these and this change.
So speaking of people who won't get vaccinated, there was a level of frustration that you have been talking about this whole time with Kansas City's not getting enough vaccines. Now all of a sudden we've got a plethora of vaccines and people aren't coming in to get them. How do you address that in the city of Kansas City and in the metro area?
Well, remember, we're actually getting a lot of people vaccinated, but they're not just in mass vax clinics or just with us or this hospital. When I go to the grocery store, you see a line there where they're getting their vaccines at Hy-Vee or wherever. So it's happening at a lot of different places right now, and we're watching those overall numbers continue to move forward. So the reality is that we will probably be into an annual COVID shot each year like we have a flu shot. It may even be combined with the flu shot so you can get both at the same time, because this virus is a RNA virus. It mutates, and we may need to be doing that like we do for a regular influenza. But I'm actually seeing a lot of people get vaccinated, and you can walk up to any of our health department clinics, and in fact, it won't be long before any drops between the two states drop away, meaning that a Kansas person or anybody in the country can get vaccinated with us and vice versa, that our folks can get vaccinated any place else. It's at that point where the supply is there, and like I like to say, if they can find their way to our door, they can expose our people, so we need to vaccinate them.
Thank you.
Any other? Yes.
So how is regulated industries going to handle this with indoor venues? You can have your mask off if you are vaccinated. Are you having to take down information at the door, or is it just they come in and maybe come to the table and check and ask people, and it's on the honor system? How's that going to work?
So Regulated Industries has been a great partner with us, but the main authority for enforcing this ordinance is with us and our inspectors. It's a complaint-driven system. So if we get folks that say, I know that everybody took masks off in this meeting and people hadn't been vaccinated, then we can go and check on that and ask them to show us whether or not they were aware. I mean, there may be a point where, for a meeting like this, if you all have your vaccination card, then none of us would have to wear masks in here while we're having this kind of a press conference. That's our goal, is to you want to have your restrictions proportionate to the level of risk for folks. And the fact that we're not seeing a huge increase, a little bit in hospitalizations, but we're not seeing an increase in deaths because the folks that were most likely to die in general have been vaccinated. But also remember, we've had 30-year-olds die from this disease in Kansas City, Missouri, so that's why everybody really needs to get protected. Thank you.
Thank you.